So let's talk about how do you know when you're hurt. I have some really clear guidelines for you because what we want to do ultimately is you want to look at something and say, okay, I have something going on. How do I turn it into a 2-week injury cycle? Because you're going to have to miss some time from these, whether you want to or not. How do you take something that's an injury and get it back to normal in 2 weeks versus something that's an injury and takes 6, 8, 12 months to heal? You have to know the difference between an everyday ache and sometimes that can be difficult. Like most of the runners I treat, like I said, are over the age of 40, 50, 60. And when I treat them, they're like, Steve, if I ran when nothing hurt, I would never run because something's always a little cranky. So here are my guidelines between injury. So you have something that's going to be injured versus like an everyday ache. And the big thing here is something we call ADLs, which are activities of daily living. Okay, so when you are out for a run, you're like, ooh, you got a little something. You're like running. I'm like, what is that? That doesn't feel good. And you get through your day, and then you get home, you're like, I don't know if I'm about to be hurt, especially if you're coming off an injury. A lot of people are like hypersensitive to being hurt again, so they'll kind of panic a little bit. So how do you know? And ADLs, activities of daily living, is the way I like to tell this. So the difference between injury and everyday ache is an everyday ache is only bothers you maybe when you run a little bit, and it's never like a stabbing pain. It's just like it doesn't feel good. And when you go back to the rest of your life, your activities of daily living, which right now is not a lot for us, it will feel fine. But when you start to have something and you're running, you're like, it doesn't feel good. And you're running along, and all of a sudden it's like, now going up and down the stairs kind of hurts, or I'm limping if I sit for a while and get up, which is really common with plantar fascia, Achilles, and some hip flexor issues. You sit for too long, that doesn't feel good. Like you stand up and you got to hobble a little bit and then start walking, and then you feel fine once you warmed up. Those are red flares. Those are warning signs, red flags that something's brewing. But if you're like up and down the stairs, I feel fine, I just can't run, or I feel fine, but when I run, I feel a little something, you're in the everyday ache category. When you start to cross the chasm of I have pain or issues when I get up out of bed in the morning, it's really stiff. When I go up and down stairs or just going downstairs, my knee has a little twinge of ache with it. You're flirting on the line of injury. This is your red flag point. This is the point when you go from something that starts to affect your ADLs at the beginning stage of this, you're in the 2-week time frame. This is when you can turn things around in 2 weeks. Trouble is that when you're at this stage, it allows you to run still. And that's tricky because what happens is you have a little, it doesn't feel good, but you can continue to run, and that continuing to run actually degrades the tissue and starts ripping it apart, and then you run into these big issues. So we do want to make sure that you're understanding this. It's fine to run with a little bit of something, but when it starts crossing to this, you need to back off. So if we look at really why, because we're going to get to this in a second. Let me get my little cheat sheet here. Let's talk about what's happening when you hurt something, okay? So we can take really any tissue. It could be your meniscus, it could be your Achilles, whatever it might be. Let's just take muscle tendon type of injuries, but it's the same for the meniscus. Here's your meniscus are these 2 discs that sit in your knee, but just let's say this is a flat surface, and then here would be a tear in the meniscus. And then if we look at a muscle or tendon, and here's a muscle coming down, so muscle attaches, make sure I'm still on the screen, it goes from bone to bone with tendons on the end. But let's say we put a tear in the muscle belly, and let's talk about what's actually happening, because when you can't see it, and you're like, what the hell, why isn't this thing healing? This should help you. So what ends up happening when you injure something, the first stage of this is inflammation. Inflammation is normal part of the healing cycle. So if you're on vitamin I, which people like to call it, or ibuprofen, and you're taking it consistently, you're dampening down your inflammatory process. Inflammation is important for building muscle. It's important for healing. You need that to happen. The trouble is when it runs rampant and just goes and just crushes somebody. So what you want to do is, okay, I'm injured. I went a little bit too far. Steve told me not to do this, but I did it anyways. You go a little bit too far, is you're going to maybe tear your meniscus, which is this little flap here, or you're going to tear a muscle. This could also be a tendon. It doesn't matter. So you're going to start initially just getting inflammation around here. And the inflammation is going to is going to clean up any debris. Because when you tear something, there's going to be debris, just like a construction site. The inflammation gets in there, cleans everything up, starts eating away at stuff, and then it signals the next step, which is the healing process. And if you get stuck in the inflammation stage, you can't get the healing. Or if you dampen the inflammation down enough, you never get to that next step because you never had the trigger inflammatory response to let things heal. So be careful about vitamin I or ibuprofen or Motrin all the time. So what needs to happen when you get to this point is you need this thing to heal, right? So how are you going to do that? The first stage of the body after the inflammatory process is going to come in, and actually it's part of the inflammatory process, and it's just going to start scarring stuff down. So what we need to happen here is we need this to scar down and drop a bunch of scar tissue on it. So let's get away from this model because I think this will be the most helpful here. Normal muscle and tendon and tissue usually have aligned fibers just like this. When you have this tear in here, the body's going to come in and it's going to drop a bunch of scar tissue on it. So it's going to look like this. And scar tissue is just haphazard tissue that's laid down. It's like, I'm from Buffalo, so the roads are really terrible here after winter because of the freezing and thawing that we go through and the salt and everything. So imagine you have a pothole, and that's your injury. The body's first stage of the healing is to take asphalt and just throw it in there. And this is scar tissue. Scar tissue is normal in the early part of the healing process. So it's going to come in and it's going to scar everything over. But if you look at this, if I were to pull on, let's say if I pull from end to end, because that's how muscles usually operate, is they'll squeeze and they'll pull and they go like this. Because all these fibers are in the same orientation and they line up perfectly like this, this can tolerate a lot of pull from end to end. But when you have injured tissue, you have a snag in the line is the best way to think about it. So if I pull on this one from end to end, you're just going to be tugging on that scar. Easy analogy. I'm not that bright, so I like to use a lot of analogies. I hope that's okay. Imagine you cut your knuckle. Make sure I'm on there. And you cut the top part of your knuckle, and it tries to scar itself over, but you just do this when it gets enough healing into it. And you just keep doing that. Eventually that thing will probably heal, but you just keep busting it open whenever you go to do your activity. Same thing happens with runners. So they take like 2 weeks off and they feel better, and this thing scars down nicely. But early on in the healing cycle, this is how your scar operates. So early on, so this will be strength over here, this is time. At time 0 when you hurt and the scarring process starts, the scar is very weak. So this is strength, this is time. The scar is very weak, so if you pull too hard, you just shred it and pull it open. This is what a lot of people do, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. What we want to do is we need to let that thing scar down, and we want to increase the strength of that scar over time, because scarring looks like this. You can take something that is all haphazardly laid down and turn it back into new tissue with the right process. It's kind of just off the screen a little bit, but this can turn back into normal tissue. Here's what you need to know. If the scar itself responds to what you do to it, okay? So hopefully this makes sense. If you do nothing, like say you hurt yourself, you sit down and you do nothing, you're like, this is pretty common. I'm gonna take 4 weeks off, I hurt myself, I'm just gonna give it some time. The scar's only gonna heal to a point that you ask it to. So let's say you pull your calf, you hurt your hamstring, your Achilles, or whatever it is, and you say, I'm gonna do nothing for 4 weeks. What'll happen is this scar will strengthen, but it'll stop strengthening itself usually to the ADL standpoint, the activities of daily living. So it'll get you to the point where you can walk again. You can go up and down stairs, you start feeling good. But every time you try to make that leap back to running, it's kind of like waiting for you. This is very common because the scar itself is only going to heal based on what you do to it. This should make kind of sense because your body adapts to stress. So if you have injured tissue, you need to stress it, and you need to keep stressing it back up into the highest level to get back to running. So just know that the scarring is normal and needs to happen when you're injured, and then it needs to turn back into normal tissue by doing stuff to it. And I'm going to run you through some quick things to do so that you can continue to progress this off, because otherwise this thing will stay here. And what will happen, I'll go ahead and erase this quick, is people will get to the point where their ADLs feel fine. They'll get to this point and then they try to run, and it's too stressful on the scar. The scar hasn't been strengthened enough, and then they have to go back down to here because they re-injure it. And then they get to here, they try again, and they just keep doing this over and over and over again. Once you get to the point where you can, this is your first milestone. Like, can you go up and down the stairs? Can you walk? Can you do these things without pain? Once you can, now it's time to go to the next level. So just note, like, scarring's normal. If you have scar tissue, that's normal. One thing I would tell you guys, early in the healing cycle, please, for the love of God, stay off the foam rollers. Like, this thing's trying to heal, and you're like bruised from your thumbs, like digging for gold in your injuries. And I know someone out there is doing that, or you're foam rolling the crap out of it, and it's trying to heal. It doesn't need you to sit there and beat it up every single day. Sometimes it just needs to be left alone. Which brings me to my next point of heat and ice, because that's a big question I always get is, should I heat it or should I ice it? I'm a big proponent of heat. Heat increases blood flow. Early in your injury cycle, the first couple days, stay away from the ice, get yourself functional, but then start using heat. Heat takes a blood vessel and goes whoop and opens it up, which can make it deliver more blood. It's a really simple thing that you can do. And I usually have my runners, when they're sitting at home on the couch or whatever, get some heat on it, because excuse me, when you're not doing anything, like right now when we're all sitting inside from this stupid virus, and you're sitting on the couch, maybe you're just watching Netflix, maybe you're watching this crazy guy for the second time today, all the blood's getting pulled out of your extremities to your gut to digest, to work on core life functions, and your legs don't get it. So if you have an injured leg or injured hip, knee, ankle, whatever, all the blood's getting stripped away. And if you're in your ankle, you're the furthest point down, so you're even worse off. So using heat is very good because it'll help deliver more blood to those injury sites, which means it can heal a little bit quicker, okay?